Hi, I'm James, and this is the F9 studio. I now run F9 Audio. I've done that now for about 10 years, but before that, I was the studio half of a UK dance and remix act called the Freemasons with my dear old friend, Russell Small. I've now built this because I've kind of had my time, and now I'm fascinated with trying to get the very best sounds for the next generation of producers and beyond. This has always been my thing. This has always been the stuff that I loved ever since I first touched. I think it was a Jupiter keyboard at the age of about 14 on stage, and was transported instantly into this world of possibilities, and have been fighting hard to try and find a way through it ever since. All of this that you see here is now dedicated to one thing, which is trying to find the way to create the very best sounds for modern productions. And I'm utterly convinced that part of the way through that is to use the older technology, because as we get, how can I put it, as we increase fidelity in everything that we do, we tend to find that we were getting it right when we were working with restrictions. And that, to me, became very obvious within film. If you remember the Star Wars reboots, when they first did the first 1, 2, and 3 episodes, and they were all beautifully digital, everything felt wrong. And for me, it's the same in audio. Particularly with digital audio, we've increased the fidelity, the sample rates and everything, and yet some of these old devices using low bit systems and all sorts of compromises down to the technology that was possible at the time sound absolutely astonishing in a modern setting. I wouldn't want to run an entire production through it, but one of the things that we specialize in here is trying to bring that into the modern DAWs. I'm ever so proud of being able to do this constantly, and I absolutely love it. It is now a complete obsession.
Yeah, it's quite a collection you've got here. Can you just give us a bit of background about F9 Audio and yeah, what is it that you do for people that don't know?
Yeah, so I was a producer for many, many years. We worked professionally for about 12 years. We had a lot of chart success, but every career arcs up. And as I started to see it come back down the other side, we were in a duo. And the one thing people always forget in duos in the music industry is you have to share all of the income. I realized after running some maths and doing some spreadsheets, I knew exactly what I was going to have to do as then a 45-year-old producer to make enough money to do the things that I wanted to do in my life. We'd had huge successes in remixes, but we were only on fixed fee for them. They were our biggest records. They helped take people like Beyonce and Kelly Rowland and Shakira to #1. We never saw royalties on them, so I still had to work, and I wanted to come back into the studio. Around that time, Russell and I did a sample pack for Loopmasters, a local Brighton company with an incredibly charismatic number of people working for them, including Matt Pelling, who everyone just loved in the industry. And it was quite a process. It was hard work, but I loved it, because it's repetitive and you're kind of going, you're starting to perfect things and work things out. And I left the project with a real almost taste for it. So as I knew that Russell and I had to go and do our things separately, I then thought, well, why don't I try and set this up? What I wasn't prepared for was how far it takes you down the rabbit hole. But what we're trying to do is take the sounds from these incredible devices, these wonderful synths and keyboards, and feed them back into the modern DAWs in a way that allow people to sound great really quickly without taking away the creativity. So the biggest thing that we concentrate on here are playable instruments. Most of them are multi-sampled. We do an awful lot of round robin sampling on analog sources. We're just starting to work with raw waveforms from some of the old beasts as well. But we found that you can plumb these in to the built-in tools inside the DAWs and show people how good their DAWs can sound if it's fed the right source material. So for example, if we're sampling, let's take something everybody might understand like a Juno, and we want to work out the very best way to take a mono bass sound out of a Juno. For example, instead of just plugging it straight up, we'll feed it into this. This is a tube preamp. All of this does is take an input signal and amplify it up to basically, it's not even line level, it's microphone output level, but it's pretty hot. That allows me to plug into some of the mic preamps that we've got here. Really good quality. We've got a mixer, we've got some APIs there, Ericsson, Montesi, the golds there, they're beautiful. And just to the left is an old Neve rack. We did have a 1081 in here, but it was a little bit unreliable and it wasn't really working well in stereo. But this 3 Series is absolutely stunning. So we might take a Juno, go into the Red DI and then into the Neve before we're starting to multi-sample these things, add a bit of EQ compression, and often we'll do some pedal work at the beginning as well. Now what that does is allows us to contour the most useful version of the sound. And what I've found in a lot of sampled libraries, particularly multi-sampled libraries, is everybody's trying to go for the kind of biggest, most sub-drenched, basically the sound's being made in isolation before it's sampled, and often what's not explained is that you're going to have to do a ton of work to that to make it fit. What we're fascinated in, and I'm obsessed with doing here, is making every single sound in situ in a track. So that basically, if we've got it to fit in a working track with drums flying, everything like that, a little bit of compression and limiting on the masters, then basically I know that it's going to work for another person. Instead of just coming out and blowing out your speakers without people understanding, you've got to be rolling bass off to get this to sound right. That's the obsession here, and it's taken us into some interesting parts, and I see you're on this at the moment, the TLA. So this is a really interesting desk by TLA. There are 2 brothers called Larking, and one of them runs second-hand equipment, and his brother Tony, TLA, Tony Larking Audio, built these series of valve consoles. Now they're not what you would call sort of 50s valve designs. There are modern systems in there, but there's valve, assuming I'm just on the kind of preamps and not really sure where they are in the EQs, but I expect in the amplifier sections of the EQ. But this rack is designed to do parallel processing. So there's a little Behringer distribution box here called the Ultralink. So you have 2 inputs and then it feeds them, fires them back out of 4 separate outputs. That's perfect for this desk, and it's configured basically. So this would be the clean signal. This would then be a parallel stereo, parallel stereo, parallel stereo. That allows you to go crazy with, say, EQs, really brighten things up, tons of top. So this, as you bring it up, the original signal stays here. This is adding some top end and a bitey mid-range maybe. Then you may go crazy. In fact, it's even there. Look, I think it's a fixed 90 hertz bass EQ on here. I've got it wound all the way up to the top. You can overdrive on the top of the channel and get a little bit of valve grunt. And then this pair becomes a controllable bass amount. There's a number of compressors in the rack underneath it, so you could have a really compressed version coming up here and just tweak a little bit, all of it up. And it allows you to build from just a simple stereo output a really controllable parallel spread of processing. Now, obviously, all of these are creating phase shifts and big lumps and things like that, but it's tactile. It's not plugins. I'm actually able to grab this stuff and really make a difference, maybe bring a few of them in stereo-wise, blah-de-blah-de-blah. You can build an incredible sound before we even start sampling, particularly on things like synth strings and stuff like that. We can lift all of the useful frequencies that users are so used to doing in plugins, and basically do half of the work before it even enters into the sample playback system, and give it so much bite and presence that when it comes in, it punches. one of the biggest compliments we get is the number of times we've had the email that starts in the same way that says, I don't know how you do it, but this stuff, I get into a track quicker than ever before. And this is the struggle, this is the joy. So all of this stuff in here, as I say, is designed to elevate in some way and beef things up.
I mean, I can also say from personal experience using your sample packs and your collections that I've never known my monitors to sound so good. Playing back a track, playing back one of your collections.
Well, also, it started off, interestingly, as quite a selfish endeavor in the fact that because I stuffed up and not paid attention to how all of the sonics got better during the minimal house and then electro and then into EDM, because all these amazing mixing guys got involved, particularly in America as well. Suddenly all the R&B and pop guys and hip hop guys were being mixed by these top professionals, but it was dance music. All of the sonics suddenly elevated up. So my view is, well, if I want to continue in this industry, I need better sounds. What I didn't realize is there's a wonderful symbiosis with that when you start to help other people, well, if you can put stuff together and then release it, I've got a working business, and the results kind of feed back on themselves in a really positive manner. I get better by you're constantly sampling. I think we use a lot of auto sampling routines, and I think I must have pressed go on it about 10,000 times by now. So once you get used to the frequency points and used to the bits that are going to make a difference, you can feed that back in. And the wonderful thing is then, as I say, this becomes this positive feedback loop. We're getting better as engineers, making better stuff. So then we're releasing more. We see the results of which packs are selling better and all that kind of stuff. We know what people want. We know what people need. Feedback, feedback, feedback. So eventually we're going to try and, the whole thing is I just want people to be released from the stress of the technical side of trying to get a big sounding record, which is so vital now, but is currently eating away people's psyche and time, which should be spent making their art better. It's become this thing to concentrate on the production. And if we can help set people free a little bit from that, then they'll concentrate more on the music and the arrangement. And that's where the enlightenment is. That's where the joy is, and that's where the things that will set you apart in the most competitive environment that music's ever seen comes from the art, not from the productions or the sounds.
Yeah, you really set yourself apart from what else is around. I think this process that you've created is so meticulous. You've got such an incredible detail for the entire process along the way. Yeah, where do you start in terms of when you've got an idea for a new pack or a new collection? Like, how does that form, and where do you take those ideas, and how do you realize them?
We're a very small company. It's really just me and my wife. So it tends to be quite a chaotic process of something will flip in here. But then we also have been pretty good at working out what's going to be happening and what's going to be important to people. And this is where this interesting symbiosis comes. Because we work on quality, we do not work on quantity. We're no interest in just throwing stuff out. Everything has to be considered. And that's created this interesting feedback loop. Whereas if we come up with a bad idea and then it doesn't really pan out, we feel it. It's stressful. And then we've got to kind of backpedal and get going again. So the overarching thing that we want to get to is I need to get all of the knowledge that we've picked up, not only during this process, but I did during artist production, into a proper, I don't want to say course, but a whole series of videos that I can actually outlay the process of starting to make records and why certain things are important, why certain things are not. To do that, we want to have a sound library that encompasses almost every genre of music. So there is now a movement as we go through stuff to make sure it's all heading towards that. And that's why this rack of samplers is out for the moment, for example, because simple things like the S1100 sounds fantastic on breakbeats, just stunning. We've got an MPC 3000 as well at the moment. has just come back from the brilliant Jazz Cat, and he's just recapped the whole thing, so that's sounding amazing. So this is part of the movement. We've been in kind of classic house and classic 80s sounds for a while. Now we're going to extrapolate out into other forms of music, and it will head towards contemporary parts, contemporary areas of music, but also deliver some of the things that only these ancient old devices can do. I have no idea, for example, why the top end on this S1100 sounds so good on hi-hats and breaks. It's a compromised technology in the fact that they had all sorts of technical things that they had to deal with the converter chips in there. The memory, for example, this famously saves a stereo sound as a left and right separate sample, and then plays them back, and there's slight phase problems with that seem to do a wonderful thing, but the brightness of the converters that are in there as well. So yeah, I could talk about samplers and the connections with them all day. The beauty at the moment, Chris, is we've got this come in. These are basically SCSI devices. This is for an ASR 10 or an ASR X. They are 3D printed, and there's a little circuit board in there. They're called Zulu SCSI. In here is a micro SD card that you plug in, and believe it or not, this has been set up, I believe, to all SCSI IDs. So 0 to 7, 8 devices, and then each one has 26 partitions on it.
Incredible.
And you can load these up with patches and sounds now from modern samplers like ESX24 format patches and contact format patches, convert them with the infamous Chicken Systems translator right directly onto the SD cards, and then just pump these in the back, and it changes everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. Back in the day, that was a zip drive, perhaps, or an external CD drive.
I did pull the zip drive out the other day, and to load, this is fully stuffed, so I think it's 32 megabytes inside, and I put a zip drive on it that had a 32 megabyte or 30 megabyte piano patch in it that I'd converted, because we got this. I'm fascinated with taking modern piano multi-samples in a workstation fashion, in other words, full velocity notes, but quite a few of them, up to about 12, spread across the keyboard, and then converting them into these old sampler formats and loading them in. Now, this isn't actually our patches. This is part of the library that came with the SCSI device. That's the little SCSI connector that's on the back of this. But to anybody who's used one of these in the past, look how quick this thing loads. Now, if we'd have loaded that patch, there you go, it's done. If we'd have loaded that patch from a zip drive, we'd basically going to have to make a cup of tea. I completely forgot how slow these damn things were.
Yeah, I remember even multiple floppy disks, one patch over multiple floppy disks.
On this, I have to say, so this is from a company, I think, Sampler Zone, and it's part of the Chicken Systems group that do these SCSI devices, but here are the Goteks. These are all from CP Magnetics. CP Magnetics, sorry, on eBay. If you've got any sampler and you're looking to kind of update them and maybe get a little bit of a built-in library for them, Chris at CP does these wonderful Gotek drives for all of the main samplers. They all come with a little USB key with a library on them, a ton of information, a ton of setup information. It's brilliant. I can't recommend him enough. He's a lovely guy, and he's created an entire sound library for nearly all of these old samplers, and it breathes new life into it, because all of the floppy disks are going to go on all machines because they've got a rubber band in them, basically. So to have this system on, and a mixture now of these SCSI things, for me, it's completely breathed a brand new life back into them. So why bother? Well, when you pump new sounds out of these old samplers through some of the gear and the equipment that we've got here, they sound absolutely massive compared to the kind of thing that you're getting out of the DAW samplers. So we're starting to do a ton of resampling. I think, what did I find the other? We did some one-shots for a pack that's going to come through, a Tech House pack that we'll have in probably February now. And I just tested to get the zip drive out and test it. It was before the SCSI box arrived for this. I put a whole series of one-shots in there that you can just map inside Logic, transfer onto this, load up, and the difference in sound that came off this 16-bit machine, the weight and the power, and instantly they start to work in records. And this is the thing that we're fascinated with, of how can we get sounds that are going to come straight up and instantly sound powerful. So yeah, now the next thing is, okay, let's get basses in there, let's get pianos in there, let's get other sounds in there, and let's see what we can do with these things. Because they all have something slightly different. For example, the 950, yeah, you stick hi-hats in there, just because of the 12-bit nature of the 950, and just because of the inbuilt filters, bearing in mind bad technology, low sample rate compared to modern day times, so the potential for aliasing is enormous. So the internal filters that are on the sampling side and then on the playback side mean you get a particular sound out of hi-hats on the S950 that I've never heard anywhere else. I remember working at DMC next to Brothers in Rhythm back in the 90s, and they always had this brilliant sound on their hi-hats, and Steve used an S950 for years and years and years, even though, you know, it was next to a 3200. He just had a set of drums in there that he knew were going to work all the time. This beauty is one of AKAI's first. It's the S612, so it's a single sample. It can only hold one sample at any one time. 12-bit machine. So it's quite similar, I would say, to the quality of maybe the early EMUs and even a little bit SP1200, but this has been modded by an amazing guy that we must link to, because if anybody's got one of these, this guy's mods are amazing. So this button here will defeat the record trigger button. Once there's a sample in there, it will defeat the playback filter. We should actually put a sample in that a little bit later on and show, because it's basically Stardust music sounds better with you instantly. So normally on an S612, there is an analog filter circuit in the playback system that takes all of the aliasing off. This will allow various degrees of defeat of that filter. And when it's off completely, it's magnificent. Also, famously, it's got these start and loop points, end and loop points sliders. This has now been modded so that these actually transmit via MIDI and receive via MIDI as well.
Wow.
And the same brilliant guy has also built basically an additional interface. So I've got a Gotek floppy drive emulator specifically for this device. So if I sample something in there I want to keep, instead of those silly mini discs, mini floppy disks that this thing, or quick discs they used to come with, you can now save stuff off as well.
Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, this has been transformational for putting things in. You put drums in there, bass sounds, you can loop a bass sound. It's got a kind of auto loop so it doesn't click. So a couple of months ago we tested putting like SH101 bass tones in there, and was amazed at how useful they were when they came out. 808s, those kind of sub bass sounds at the moment, sound amazing in this, particularly when you use the sample defeat. And again, it's just this overarching obsession we've got here that these things were made with bad technology, but they have something special that is vital to understand and utilize today, because you put them in a modern track, it can just really take things off.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like you're embracing the old technology with the benefits of modern technology with these Gotek drives. And I've noticed that in your studio in a few places, you're not afraid to bring things up to date to a certain degree.
No, you kind of have to. It's that I've always said that, particularly we had a Jupiter 8 here for years, and it got to the point where it was becoming a financial liability. It was getting so expensive to insure due to its value and its movability, that eventually we kind of moved it on. But the one thing I learned from having some of those things now is that it's basically like owning classic cars. It's not a cheap business. You do have to keep them carefully looked after, and they will need work and money, but it's 100% worth it. Classic example is this. So this is Oberheim Matrix. Okay, so this came to me a good few years ago. It was in great cosmetic condition, but this is a Japanese one. It's not actually made by Oberheim, it's made in Japan by another company, and their power supplies, believe it or not, were made from a fibrous board that starts to break down. And everybody who's owned one always regrets picking it up. I thought it was an American one. I don't think I read the listing properly. This in the past started buzzing. At one point it caught fire. There was smoke coming out the back. It just refused to tune on certain days. You've got to run this huge auto-tune procedure, and it would just give up on certain voices. It would sound wonky, and the whole thing had sounded like it was going through a lo-fi plugin. And then I found one of the brilliant team of people in this country called Synth Professor, and he sourced a brand new modern power supply.
Oh, wow.
And put this thing back together. And the difference out of this is extraordinary. This is now silent. There's no noise on the line. There was humming and buzzing and a bit of crackling and things like that. This is now one of the quietest synths ever in the studio, sorry. And it's, yeah, I've got things from sequential circuits that are not as quiet as this. And this will show you just how when you take these old devices and change the things internally on them to bring them up to modern spec, everything changes. So this, I can come in the morning, completely cold, and these were these were very, very temperamental. I can just run the tuning on the whole thing, and it will tune all 6 voices from cold, which is unheard of from an awful lot of Matrix expanders.
Particularly, yeah, I think things like power supply is so important to the stability of the whole system.
Yeah.
Oscillators,
So, for example,
like
if you get something like a Roland SH101, an original one, don't use the original power supply. It's probably knackered now, and nowhere near as good spec as a modern one and pushing out the right voltage. We've really noticed that when some of the modern power supplies that you can get now are so good, and particularly anybody who's got these older machines. I mean, that is a beautiful looking power supply compared to the absolute pig's ear of a thing that had burn marks on it. All of the circuit board was starting to crack. You'll be amazed at how many of these machines have modern power supplies available now. And it means, I mean, this is set up just to do, we're auto sampling the raw waveforms of this at the moment, which is an absolute joy. We've got a bit of a wheeze that we're thinking with Contact. That we've developed a little bit of code that I think is going to allow us to create a really interesting polysynth that's going to allow you to choose from fully multi-sampled waveforms from all of the old analogs.
Fantastic.
Because some of these are just unique. The saws in this sound fantastic. The PWM in there is quite special. Yeah, these are beasts.
Really rips through, doesn't it, that bass? and you've also done some experimenting, I remember, on one of your particular packs with EEPROMs and making your own EEPROMs for synths and samplers. Gone down the rabbit hole, yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, so these are all for the Linn. We've got another set for the DX as well. So the DX has gone out to get a little repair at the moment, but these are all for the Linn Drum that's right here. So Linn Drum's having a real moment at the moment because I've noticed Behringer have just finally released the specs on their Linn Drum clone. I also noticed they used the Linn Drum name in a lot of the promo as well, which means they've definitely spoken to Forat, I would say, and Roger Linn. I hope they have anyway. I think they've kind of learnt from past mistakes that you have to involve the originators in some of this stuff. This I managed to pick up remarkably cheaply before it all just exploded. And I've always been fascinated with this machine because of the swing and the fact that a lot of the sounds in this aren't very well edited. So famously, the snare has a little bit of kind of digital air at the beginning of it, where basically you had no waveform editing when Roger Linn was making all of the original sounds. And they had to be squashed to living hell to sound anywhere decent. But what I'm fascinated with this is you've got, and in fact we can just do this like let me just turn this off. Inside, because this is open, this one arrived again with a brand new power supply, which means the outputs are stunningly quiet, really make a huge difference. All of these came with 0 insertion force sockets, these little blue connectors. So you can see here at the bottom on the crash and the ride symbols. Now this is how many chips it needs to reproduce a crash. The reason being it's at a much higher sample rate. So
because it's high.
yeah, high frequency. Right? So for that fidelity, you need, I think, what is it? There's 8 chips for each one, right? So it's really bizarre. So these are all 8-bit encoded. And in fact, here I've got this set up for the. We were trying to recreate some of the Thriller type grooves. So that wonderful guy Anthony, who was in all of the original Thriller sessions, has done videos explaining that they used an 808 clap, an LM1 kick, and an LM1 snare drum. We've had real problems trying to get the LM1 snare drum in there. Actually, I've had to use a digital version of it and then transfer it over onto EEPROM. It's very hard. I even contacted 4AT that now own all of the intellectual property for Linn, and they never replied. So I don't have the original data, the original EEPROM data to burn a proper snare on it. But this is fantastic because these now, let me just pop them out.
Amazing to have that functionality to just
yeah, especially on the things like the snares. So interestingly, we found now the kick drums aren't tunable on this, but because the toms and the congas are, we thought, well, actually modern kick drums are a lot longer than the really short kick drum that's actually inside of this. What happens if we burn, say, like a 909 kick onto the 2 chips that the toms or the conga? Probably the toms are best because they're going to be a little bit punchier. And we've had some amazing results because we have tunable control of the toms, also 3 different pitches, so you can get some interesting rhythms out of it. But then we started going, well, hang on, why are we just putting old sounds in this? Why don't we put new sounds into these chips? And that's where this thing's come from. The Baytronics BX32 Bapto 2. So this will only run on a PC, but it allows you, with a little bit of software called Electron Gate, to take any sample, it'll trim it automatically, and then write the binary file that this thing will then place onto an EEPROM chip. It is a bit of a process, but it's 100% worth it. We're fascinated, for example, of putting modern synthwave snares and things that we've designed onto these chips and then firing them back out of the Linn, which is why here we've got a box just full of chips. The great thing is this particular device uses EEPROMs that were used heavily in fruit machines and arcade machines, which means there's stocks and stocks and stocks of new old stock EEPROMs. So I think at one stage I managed to persuade a guy to sell me 400 chips for a really small amount. And the great thing is there's a variety of different writing speeds, and these chips that we had for here just piled straight out.
Excellent. So you're also going to provide some stuff for the Sonicstate audience?
Yeah, so particularly with the Linn Drum, we went recently to a fantastic local studio that's put in a vintage Neve hand-wired console. Well, in fact, the studio's been built around it. I nipped off to record some hi-hats, and my brilliant assistant took a load of recordings from this through all of the old gear. So not just the desk, but some lovely Paultec EQs and all of the rest of it. So I'll get all of that up because the Linn Drum's definitely having a moment at the moment. And I'll try and find some other lovelies in here as well. One of the reasons why there's another drum machine out over here is that obviously that's a hell of a process. This is a Korg DDD-1. And famously, in fact, I don't know if you can see just under here, Chris, here's 2 of the original Korg cards, one called Rock 1 and Gated Reverb 2. But you'll notice these 2 look a little bit more modern. These are made by a brilliant company called Wave Rex. and they allow you to put drum sounds onto cards that can be read by this machine. And it's got a USB-C socket. That will give you an idea of the speed.
That's really cool.
This card, I can go through them, can contain up to 99 different kits. It's got tons of memory in there. There is only a discrete amount of memory this thing can address, but the software that runs this card will dynamically assign the correct amount to the length of the sound that you're putting in. So in other words, if you put a really short hi-hat in there, well, it will allow you to put a lot of those on there. But if you want to put a loop or a melodic sound on there that's longer, it will dynamically work out how much of that can go onto one of the card banks, and then you can load that one sound in. So this has sped the entire process up. I remember the first time I wrote to this card a whole bank of drums, I did a loop at the studio. A celebratory loop, because the equivalent of doing it on the Linn Drum would probably take me an hour, and it burnt that in 2 seconds. So yeah, this is where you see those connections between old and new kind of come into play.
Yeah, and it's quite a unique design, that to have the sort of the LED screen or the numbering on the actual PCB. It's a very tidy design, isn't it? I'm sure
These are fantastic.
Clearly iterated that.
Now I've got the whole gamut of these, because this is part of our real interest at the moment, is putting modern sounds into old playback devices. So he also generates cards for the Korg M1, which also runs the T series and the Wave Station. The U220 and U10 from Roland that have this fascinatingly thick sound. And what's the other one? Oh, the Roland R8. So we've got a card for the Roland R8 that we can put modern sounds in, which is fantastic.
Amazing, cool. And so we're kind of at your sort of studio base. Yeah. And can just tell us about the monitors you've got here. Like, how are you listening to what you're creating while you're creating it?
Believe it or not, the two extremes that I use the most, these are Tantrum Audio speakers. I did have Avantones in here that are very similar. So Avantones are a little bit bigger, and they're basically modern versions of the Auratones, but one of them mucked up and suddenly went very thin, which is a real shame, because I love these mid-forward speakers on for doing general work. The reason being, they don't have a bass end, they don't have high tops, so you don't get distracted by mucking around with all of that. When you're trying to create and you're actually trying to do the music, these can be incredibly useful to listen on, because they'll stop you worrying about your kick drum, your bass and things like that, and worry about the actual notes you're playing. They're wonderfully aggressive. It's a single English guy who's developed them and was building them, and I saw them at Gearfest and loved them. So they popped in a few weeks ago. I put them up on stands, so they're right at my ear level. Ever so good for doing mid-range balancing. So I've always struggled getting hi-hats, loops and claps to work. On these, I can run them fairly quietly and nail that within a few minutes. The other sound that I'm using all at the moment are my event Opals. I absolutely love them. And just recently I shoved a sub on them and was like, why the hell didn't you do that years ago? It's not a special sub. I tested a couple in here, and it's just it's a Presonus sub actually, but it's got a foot switch control that allows me to turn it on and off. And for some reason, the roll-offs worked beautifully with it and extended the range here. So we're now almost at full range. I think technically the sub underneath roll, it's just technically within the 20 hertz. So in other words, that's that 3 dB drop. Because one thing that working on a lot of electronic stuff, particularly when you're starting to use a lot of overdrives, which we do an awful lot of the time, people don't realize how much subsonic information any level of overdrive will develop. So for example, they may put one of the modern keyboards, like a Juno D or something like that, plug it into their audio interface and drive it quite hard without realizing that the overdrive is creating tons of subsonic information. If you don't know to get rid of that, you aren't going to hear it on anything other than a full range sound system. It is so low that you won't even know it's there. It will just start, your production will just start to, I call it, it's almost like it's being throttled. I used to get it on these events. So these events where they're fairly decent sized speakers, but they're not huge. What I didn't realize until I really dived into acoustics recently is that with all speaker designs, there is a physical high pass filter and it's immensely steep. So when you look at your speaker specs, if it says that its lowest point is 45 Hertz, that means legally they're allowed to say that with a 3 dB drop. So if that is the lowest point, it's already starting to curve off. It then drops so fast, I can't tell you. So these, without the sub, there's no way, for example, they're going to replicate anything under about 40 Hertz. Down there, it gets increasingly important if you're involved in any kind of music, particularly if it's going to head to a club, that you need to have some level of monitoring that will reproduce that. Vital for us here so that we can investigate all of this stuff and make sure that our stuff delivers that perfectly. But one thing we also got, which I'd never be without now, are these. A really, 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 really good pair of closed back headphones. You can see how much wear I've had on these. These are Focal Clear Pro MGs. They are not cheap. This is £1,000 worth of headphones. I saw this at an expo from their distributor, and they had the new focal monitors, the massive ones, and I think I put on Blade Runner 2049 soundtrack. From the beginning of it, it's got one of the lowest sounds I've ever heard reproduced. It's a proper Hans Zimmer, you know, he's got some new samples basically. It's really good sound design in that movie. And the actual speakers couldn't reproduce them. Put this on, and I heard all of it instantly. So these will go down to 5 Hertz. For what we do here, it's absolutely vital because it's going down to 5 Hertz in a very well controlled environment. And yeah, there's going to be fluctuations at those kind of levels. There is with every reproduction device, but nowhere near that there would be in a room full of equipment like this. So the mixture between having a proper sub responding set of monitors in here and headphones means we can pretty much work out everything that's happening right at the bottom. And what amazed me, as I say, is when you use distortion, just how much ridiculous level is being output.
Yeah. And you've got over there a sort of a blimp looking speaker as well.
Yeah, this is, so you have to excuse the glue that fell on it ages ago. It's just, it's one of their old Zeppelin speakers. And it's just plugged in using a line level converter out the back. It just allows me another thing that's a bit more like a Bluetooth speaker. I mean, it is just it's a pre-boot Bluetooth speaker. It's even got the old iPhone connector on it.
Oh yeah.
Because you used to put the phone on. But I've loved the sound of these for years. And that's just set up so I can turn all of the main monitors off and just kind of have a working speaker that's going to show me what it's like in someone's kitchen.
Such a useful thing to do.
And this is, we had a Mackie Big Knob, one of those infamous monitor controllers in here, and it went wrong. And I was like, well, actually, let's see if we can upgrade a little bit, and spent the money on this from SPL. And I remember the mix we were working on. This arrived, and we moved the Mackie out. And I was so disappointed with our mix the moment this went on. And I was like, oh no, it's made everything sound rubbish. No, it's just true. Our mix was rubbish. Within 10 minutes, we had it absolutely firing. And if you can increase the quality of your monitor controller, all of your decisions are being made by what you hear, basically. So the quality of your monitor controller is absolutely vital. I know Steve Mack, I think, has got a mastering grade monitor controller in his room, and he absolutely swears by it. But I'm amazed at when you change these to a less coloured system, how much it ups your game as well.
And you're clearly a bit of a synth fan.
Yes.
There's a good number of synths in here. What are you kind of drawn to when you when you think about your synths, and when you need to deploy a synthesizer? Where do you like to go to?
Anywhere, but they've all got a place in my heart, and for various different reasons. But what's really interesting, I know that I'm always drawn to the things that I used as a younger man. So for example, a friend of a friend had a JX8P, and there was one in my friend's studio, and I spent a lot of time fiddling about with it. I think I even overwrote one of the owner's important patches as well, which is all a bit of a nightmare. But because I know these things so well, and I love this little controller, they're quite underrated synths, the 8Ps actually, because I suppose there's just tons more famous Roland entities, but they're great fun. They really are. The Prophet X above it, a modern synth. It's taken a lot of heat just recently after a certain YouTuber decided to completely have a go at it.
Oh yeah.
But I have to say I love it because I can put, we can put our own samples inside it and fire them through those lovely filters. Another thing that we can use to add a little bit of grunt to stuff and create some more complex patches.
Cool. And you have a DSI Evolver over here.
Yeah, so this one probably right now needs a good cleanup. We did have a Prophet VS, but all of the Prophet VS waveforms are actually inside this, alongside these additional analog oscillators. So we thought, well, okay, we might move the VS on. We did a load of sampling from it. This is far more controls, but unfortunately this isn't the one with the replaced encoders. So a warning to everybody out there who's making stuff. Please, please, please check your encoders for longevity. This will now need to be completely taken apart and everything cleaned out. I did it personally probably about 7 years ago, and it desperately needs it again. A lot of the others that you see here, there's some excellent Korg. I love this thing, the Triton Extreme, because it's got a valve force system in there. So there's a couple of I don't know if it's one or two, but there's a couple of 12AX7 valves on the output, which means you can overdrive this. And again, we've got a route to get samples in there. That's why this is here. Same with the Korg Kronos. Hydrasynth, obviously. That's been great fun.
Yeah, really popular synth.
Yeah, but just, again, we're very lucky here to be able to pull in the stuff. You have to excuse the dust on this. It's right underneath the air conditioner. No, the rack of shame behind you, the stuff that's not turned on at the moment. So these used to be some of our main racks in the studio. They're just at the back now, so we can actually get a few things racked up. One thing that I am loving at the moment are the old DXs. This is a DX7 2FD, and right at the bottom of it, you can see a lovely red cartridge that puts in hundreds of banks that we're slowly populating. I completely forgot how good these things sound. And over in the rack there's a TG77. Again, do excuse the dust.
There's a lot of dusting to do.
Yeah, there certainly is.
And an
ASRX. Yeah.
Sampler.
Yeah, so this is the, with one of the, that's got Gotek floppy on the front as well. And we're in the middle of loading those up with F9 kits because we've got the conversion route set now.
Incredible. It's a phenomenal collection. What's the old, TX81Z as well. Very nice. What's the oldest piece of gear? What's your kind of, what's been here the longest?
Oh, in terms of old, it's definitely this. We did have a mini Moog here, but when I moved house, there were a few things that I really needed just to up the deposit level and things like that. So I think I sold the mini Moog, we had a Jupiter 8 here from the Freemasons days, and a few other bits and pieces. So this is now probably the oldest bit. Very good quality inside. I watched a couple of, there's a great number of videos about how to strip these down, and I didn't realize how easy they were to service. We had a sticking key for a bit. That's on the way to being repaired. Wonderful sounding thing. Always forget every time you play it just how good these things sound. Just quickly here, this is a 909 rack, and if you think about it, the 909 cymbals are the most successful cymbal sample of all time.
Yeah, the right.
The hi-hats particularly.
Yeah.
So we're in the middle of, this has been altered. So the reason we've used a rack mount is that you don't want to butcher a real 909. You don't want to start going in and changing the circuit boards. The brilliant Harry Axton at HKA Design allowed, basically built a system and an entire workflow for us where we could have some modern EPROMs, EEPROMs, sorry. So these are completely rewritable by that EEPROM Bernie that you saw. We now have a full workflow to take modern samples and put them in the playback circuit of a 909. And the results are wonderful because they've just got this grunt and this power. If you think about the thickness of 909 cymbals and hi-hats, there's a reason why they've worked so well in club music. So we're on this mission to put modern sounds in those. And again, got a whole series of EEPROMs here that we're starting to build. Great thing is here, these just erase in a flash and write the new information on. So
Fantastic. Is that the Yocto? Is that what that is? Oh, what's that actually called, that 909 unit?
this was, there was one, it's 1990.
1990, that's it.
Yeah, so there, I've forgotten who designed it. There's one guy who put all of the bits out. It was kind of like a series of kits. And this unit was put together by someone who basically turned it into a full project and was selling them assembled and unassembled. I was so lucky to get it when it turned up because they don't come up often. Although the power supply that arrived with it was, now I can't, let me get this right. I think it was, well, it was the wrong version of AC or DC. So when it first arrived, I thought it was knackered.
Okay.
Luckily it wasn't, it just needed the correct power supply.
Fantastic. Cool, and in terms of F9 audio, your output, what are you kind of working on at the moment? What can people expect in the future from F9?
We're on the third version of, third installment of our Argon drum series, which is just trying to get, concentrating on one particular drum element. So it's hi-hats at the moment. I recorded out in a fantastic Neve studio a good few months ago, 15 sets of live hi-hats. They'll be going into that 909 unit as well that's just over there. And we're also gonna then take a load of digital and analog sourced hats. So all of the analog hats will be multi-sampled up to 8 times again, maybe even more, I think, because the one thing I've noticed is anything that's totally noise-based or these interfering sine waves that most of the analog hats, like 808 hats are, every single one is so dramatically different, you need lots of options. So we'll concentrate through that. We've got more tech house tracks releases coming, and then we're building out towards a whole series of instruments that will cover every genre of music that we can and plug into the various DAWs. And then I'll try to offload all of the production advice into a course that I've picked up over the years, alongside all of this stuff as well. We just basically want to, if we could, as I say, help the next generation of people come up, make stuff quickly and sound good quickly so they can get more into their ideas, that's the gold standard. To do that while we're running with just a small company where we're kind of constrained with how much we can put out, that's the constant balance, the constant fight, but it's good fun.
Yeah, well, you're doing a fantastic job, James. Yeah, thank you very much for speaking to us today.
Pleasure.